Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jalen and today I have my March wrap up. First, as always, I have my beverage and today is a really interesting find that I have. It's an India Pale Hard Seltzer. So think White Claw, we love, but make it an IPA. It's like my dream come true. It's only 175 calories, it's 6%. So it has, it packs the heat of an IPA, but it only has 2 carbs and no sugar, which is wild. So yeah, I found these at my local shop where I get all like my beer and stuff, and it's so good. I love it. I love it as low calorie. I like that it's still 6%. It's fun. So yeah, if you're interested, it's called Sparkling Still Water. Very good. This one's a dank citrus flavor. I'm hyped to find more of their seltzers. This is awesome. So yeah, it's very good. So I read 9 books this month. I would say it wasn't a bad reading month, but I only had one 5-star read, and that was a memoir. Yeah, it wasn't like the best reading month I've had, but it was overall pretty good. So let's just get into it. I'll start with my favorite book that I read this month, and that was Consent by Vanessa Springora. And this is my favorite book I read this month, but it was definitely the most difficult. And when I tell you, when I read this book, every single page, my jaw was on the floor. It is so gutting and infuriating, but so well written, and I'm so glad this book exists for Vanessa Springora. Basically what this book is, it's a memoir about a 13-year-old French girl who is groomed by a 50-year-old acclaimed writer in the French literary community. And so right off the bat, I knew this was going to be a heavy read. And while this book is rooted in this relationship that Vanessa Springora had with this writer, his name is Gabriel Matzneff. She refers to him as G throughout the memoir. What was really horrifying and particularly just like gutting about this story was the way in which Vanessa discusses how the people around her, including bystanders and third parties and even her parents, were complicit in this grooming and this relationship. This particular time period in France, what's discussed here is this societal belief in freedom and desire and kind of this construct that they rely on in order to basically legitimize G's behavior. So he publishes these different works about his stances on pedophilia, and he discusses his exploits of girls and boys that are very young, and he tries to legitimize it by saying that they are still consenting to his behavior and that adults should have the ability to pursue their desires as they see fit, which is very disgusting. And it's just insane that the people around him just basically didn't check him for it or let his behavior slide and perpetuated it through their silence, and to the detriment of this young girl. So it was very, very horrifying to read it many times, and overall it's so infuriating to see what Vanessa was subjected to as a result of the people around her not protecting her and the ways that pedophilia was legitimized in this time period. But what I think this book does so well is that Vanessa, through her telling her story, she reclaims her narrative and her story, because through Gabriel's work, he basically took her story from her and made her seem as if she was complicit in this relationship, which she wasn't, as she was underage and could not consent to it. And what she does is she reveals his horrible behavior and what was done to her and reclaims her story and basically permanently holds him accountable for what he did to her. When I tell you this book, I was just like so angry and so like fired up reading it. It was just insane to me that this happened to her. Yeah, I feel like I haven't seen too much coverage of this one like on Bookstagram and BookTube, but I really hope, in light of the subject matter, of course, I hope more people give this one a shot, because I think it is so important and just so revealing to know that this was permitted to happen back then. And hopefully through stories like these, we can prevent it from happening again, and knowing the importance of third parties and bystanders to protect children, because they cannot consent to these relationships, of course, and they need the protection as vulnerable young children. But I'm so glad I read it. I think it's a brilliant, brilliant memoir, and I'll never, never forget this book. It's just incredibly moving. So definitely the best book I read this month for sure. Next, I have a slim little novel. It's been around quite a bit. It's a Reese's book club pick. Is Infinite Country by Patricia Engel. This was kindly sent to me by Avid Reader Press. I really, really like this book. So this book follows a Colombian family that is fractured by immigration and the way that they have mixed citizenship status. And we follow the hardships they face as they move between Colombia and the United States, and when the father is deported back to Colombia, kind of the struggles that they go through as a family and trying to navigate citizenship and immigration and the hardships that they face due to poverty and alcoholism for the father. And so this is an incredibly fast-paced but beautifully written novel that follows this family and the different perspectives of each of them. It's 2 parents and 3 kids primarily that they follow, and the plot is very propulsive. It keeps you glued to it. I do think my one, critique of this book is that I think the plot, this book is so plotty that at times it felt more so like she was summarizing the plot for the reader rather than immersion in the plot. And so I think if this book had like maybe 50 or 100 more pages and kind of let the plot kind of just ride at certain points, I think it would have been a lot more immersive and fleshed out in terms of getting to know the characters a little bit more. But I do think, despite that, what she's able to do in the short, I think under 200 pages, is just insane to me. The way that she builds her characters, the way that she has a full packed plot, and she does it all so well, and blending in mythology as well. It's just a really excellently executed novel. And I really think it finds hope despite the numerous setbacks that this family encounters as a result of basically conditional citizenship. I think a really good nonfiction pairing to this book is Conditional Citizens by Leila Lalami. That book was incredible. I covered it a lot on my channel when I read it, but I think it's a really interesting look at citizenship and immigration and the ways that white supremacy are a detriment to people coming to this country that are not white. And so I think they're both really well in conversation with each other, of course, but I think for a novel, it discusses those topics amazingly. And yeah, it's a very good, pacey, but very well done novel with a lot of depth to it. So loved it. Next, I have another arc that's Whereabouts by Jhumpa Lahiri. Sorry for the ring light. This one was also sent to me by the publisher Knopf. This is a slim little novel full of vignettes, and so we follow this narrator who is a middle-aged woman in Italy who is a professor at a university. Basically what this novel is a collection of vignettes in which we follow her in different locations, so on the couch, in the sun, at the register. And so they're very brief vignettes, and we follow her as she kind of gathers her thoughts and basically sits in her solitude and loneliness as a middle-aged woman that's kind of by herself. And so if you know me, that's a Jalen book to the fullest, in which we basically just follow a woman with no plot, in her head, good writing. So this was definitely right up my alley. And at the start, I really, really loved this book, and I thought it was going to be a 5-star read. However, as I got further and further into the book, we do learn about her solitude through the grief that she reveals throughout the book, and the way that her familiar relationships kind of play into her solitude and her mindset and the way that she thinks about certain things. This often gives very beautifully written insights into this woman's mind. She's a really interesting character and definitely someone that I was eager to spend time with. However, I think as a narrative, it needed a little bit more oomph to keep me attached to this character and to, I don't know, make her stay in my mind more. I feel like since I finished this book, I haven't thought about it too much, but I did like my experience reading it due to the really good writing. To describe the writing, it's that very clear and precise, yet beautiful and evocative language that I really do like. I just feel like there needed to be a little bit more emotional pull to keep me tied to this narrative, and by the end of it, it felt like it kind of just petered out, and it wasn't too emotionally impactful, which a book doesn't need to be good, I would say, but I wish there's a little bit more meat to it to stick with me, I guess. But I do think, actually, there's a really good video from Rebecca Eats Books, who recently covered like 4 different types of readers. So she goes over character, plot, setting, and language readers. And I think if you are either like a character or a language hybrid like me, I think you'll really like this book. And I'm eager to have more people read this book because I really want to talk to more people about it. One thing that's really interesting about this book is that it is translated from Italian to English by Jhumpa Lahiri herself. It's a good middle of the road read for me. Seltzer break. Next, we have Writers and Lovers by Lily King. I really, really like this book. It was exactly what I was looking for at the time after reading those books. I wanted something kind of just like lighter, kind of contemporary-ish. It wasn't too dark. However, this book did end up being kind of dark in terms of us following this woman who is a novelist trying to write her novel, and she is in poverty living in this man's garage. She walks his dog to make some extra money. She works at a really kind of fancy restaurant, but she's kind of just living day to day trying to finish her novel. And she's dealing with the grief of recently losing her mother, which is heavily impacting her. And eventually she meets these 2 different men. Through the love triangle with these 2 men, she just starts to discover herself and kind of get out of her slump and move through her grief, which I thought was a really beautiful look at a woman navigating grief and trying to find herself despite feeling quite lost in life. Not a new favorite or anything, but I really did like it. I feel like a character focus with good writing. This is a good pick for you. Next, I have The Scapegoat by Sarah Davis. This book was a weird one and a very Jalen book in terms of it being very similar to Death in Her Hands by Ottessa Moshfegh. However, instead of following an older woman, here we follow a middle-aged man who works at a university. And he's very like weird and kind of keeps to himself, sits in his own reflections, isn't very social. And so the character's name is N, and what we learn is that his father has recently died. As he begins investigating his father's death, he goes to this weird hotel and he meets a variety of characters that start to play with his mind. And as we get further into it, we start to question whether N is reliable and what the mystery really is, what happened to his father, who is N. I think if you go into this book blind, it's really beneficial because the mystery is a big part of the fun. I would say that this mystery gets so like weird that by the end of it, I wasn't sure what happened. And that initially I was like, did I even like this book? But I will say that I could not put it down. And I think the writing is really solid. It's very clear, kind of in a similar vein to Otessa Moshfegh. So I really enjoyed that part of it. It's incredibly suspenseful and sometimes sad. And, you know, looking at a very lonely narrator, which I feel like I'm always reading. I don't know why. Like upon reflection, I found that I did really like this book. And I really want to reread it again to try to pick at the mystery and see the nuances that Sarah Davis puts in here. Because I think she wrote this book over a long period of time, like almost 10 years, I want to say, if I remember from an interview I listened to. But yeah, it's a really interesting look at another character that's kind of navigating some form of grief and reconciling his past and his childhood due to the way his parents were to him. Yeah, it's a weird one. If you can't tell, I'm having a hard time explaining this book without spoiling it or giving too much away, and it's just weird. But if you like that weird, like, what the hell did I just read kind of feel, this is a really good one for you. It was strange, but I keep thinking about it and I want to reread it, so I recommend it. Next, I have Dead Girls by Selva Almada. This one's out from Charco Press, and they kindly sent this to me as well. It's translated by Annie McDermott. This book was so good. So it's billed as journalistic fiction, in which what appears to be Selva Almada, she looks at these 3 murders that happened in the 80s in Argentina. And what this book is analyzing femicide and looking at the way that toxic masculinity and machismo are perpetuated to sustain gender violence, in the ways that these 3 women and many other women she intersperses throughout here, but these 3 girls are the focus, how the violence that they experienced and their ultimate murders were never brought to justice. And so this book, I think, is so important in terms of giving these 3 girls voices and telling their stories and attempting to resolve the crime that's committed against them. And what she does so well here is looking at the ways that the lack of societal resources and apparent care into these murders perpetuates femicide. And I think a really good companion to this book is Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor, which uses a much different format to tell a very similar story in terms of lack of justice and the way that toxic masculinity is a detriment to women, and the ways that we need to constantly analyze it and speak out about it and confront it in order to make further and further attempts to end it, basically. The book is so gutting in terms of it fully, documenting what happened to these girls. It's so sad. Through her investigation, she meets with family members and interviews them. And you see the way that these deaths have impacted their families as well. And it's so gutting, but it's so important. And I just think it's a brilliantly written and investigated book. So definitely check it out if you're a fan of true crime and want to learn more about femicide and want like an innovative look at this as well. I think it's a really interestingly crafted and structured book in terms of weaving between these 3 different girls' murders and stories. And so yeah, I loved it. It's brilliant. Next, I have a book that I really loved. It's called Field Study by Chet'la Sebree. And this book comes out this summer, I believe in June. I got this one in NetGalley from FSG, which is awesome. I love them. This book is a prose poem that looks at Black womanhood and her navigating and reconciling with, in particular, one white man, but generally her relationships with white men in the past. And through this analyzing the relationship that she had, she looks at Black womanhood and her desires. And what she does really interestingly is she writes it in fragments, but intersperses some really popular quotes from pop culture and literature. She kind of bounces off of these quotes and tells her own story and reflects on these quotes in her own life and her relationship with this man. A really good use of fragments here. I know I've been talking a lot on my channel about me trying to figure out what I think about fragments, and this one does it so well. So I've decided that I'm not pushing fragments out of my life. It just depends on the book, I guess. So I finally came to a conclusion there. But yeah, I really love this. If you like poetry, if you like prose poems, if you like fragments, if you want to read more about Black womanhood and just have really searing, beautiful language and reflections on all those topics, I would highly recommend this one. Yeah, I think it only has like 8 or 9 reviews so far on Goodreads, which is a crime in my opinion. So yeah, definitely add this to your TBR if that sounds good to you. Okay, next, I have another NetGalley read, and that is Open Water by Caleb Azumah Nelson. And I was so excited for this book because 2 of my favorites, Hannah from Let's Talk About Books Baby and Grace from GK Reads, both gave it 5 stars and said it's a beautiful literary romance book. So I was so hyped for it. I did really enjoy this book. However, it didn't completely work for me, unfortunately. But I do think, despite my criticisms, that you should read this book. We follow this couple. The man is a photographer and the woman is a dancer. So they're both artists, and they meet at a bar one day, and you kind of see their relationship flourish from there, and the way that it's a very slow burn of a romance. And it's told in the second person, so it's addressed as you feel this, you think this, etc. And I think the romance is so beautiful, so well done. And the writing is what sold this book for me. There's so many passages in looking at the way that racial anxiety is to the detriment of this man, and the way that he is constantly afraid for his life due to racialized violence, and the way that this kind of causes the relationship with this woman to suffer. And it's so tragic seeing the way that his race and the constant anxiety he has completely makes him paralyzed, basically. And so I think the way that Caleb Azumah Nelson talks about this topic is just so nuanced. In some of these passages, I was just like mind blown. So good. I think my few critiques here is that I think maybe it's in part to the second person narration, or just generally, I think from a narrative perspective, I think the structure at times is a bit off. I think this book is a little bit loose in its narrative, which maybe was the intention here, but for me personally, it just didn't completely work. I felt the story was a little bit scattered, but overall, I think the romance at the root of the story and these characters was so well done. So I do recommend it. I just think personally, some of the structural and heavy use on like poetic language was not completely my thing, but I do think this is absolutely worth your time and a really promising debut novel, and I can't wait to read more from him. So yeah, check it out. Final book I have like 70-ish pages left. It's Early Morning Riser by Katherine Heiny, and this one was sent to me by the publisher Knopf. I feel like I have a lot of arcs in this video, but this one is a very like breezy, light, contemporary novel following this woman named Jane who falls in love with this man named Duncan in Boyne City, Michigan. And Duncan is basically a player. He gets around a lot with women, and you follow Jane and her family and her relationship with him, and kind of just follow her life and the various people that she meets. And so to start, I was so like in the mood for this. I wanted something very light and breezy and just kind of chill to take my mind off things, basically. And I do think that this book is a very fun, light read. I've seen a ton of love for it, and I totally understand. I think by the midway point of this book, though, it started losing steam, and I started to not care as much. And so right now I'm kind of just pushing through it, but it's not really sticking with me, and I kind of just want to get done with it. I do think it'll have its audience, and I will say that at certain points in this book, there has been some questionable coverage of a certain character's mental capacity, and the ways that these characters kind of address it is at times, I think, a bit sketch, and I'm very eager to see some more Own Voices reviews of this book to kind of get their perspectives on the way this character is treated. There was one explicitly ableist line in one scene in which a character, she gives birth to a child, and the doctor says, oh, 10 fingers, 10 toes, good to go. And I was immediately like, why would you even include that? It just rubbed me the wrong way, and so I'm a bit skeptical of that part of this book. Yeah, if you have read this book, I would love to talk to you about it and kind of get your thoughts on that aspect of it. And I just wanted to give fair warning going into this that there's perhaps some poor handling of some issues here, but overall I'm a bit mixed on this one. But I do think this book will be pretty buzzy, a light like rom-com read. So yeah, that's where I stand on that one. So yeah, that about does it for my March wrap up. Yeah, I have a lot of good books on my TBR for April, so I'm really excited for next month and the reads I'm going to be talking about then. And I think I'm going to try to vlog in April, so that is my goal. So until next time, cheers.